Dominic, we're back.
We're back.
I know. It's
So,
one of those things where you take a little bit of time away and it doesn't feel like enough, but it was still something.
yeah. And in the world of news, it feels like I don't know. I feel like we've accelerated 5 years ahead of ourselves now. Where are we, Jenna? When are we?
We are in a repeat of an era because I remember this happened the last
Okay.
Trump administration where a journalist would step away for a much needed break, come back, and like 5 years of news has happened. And I feel like we're back in that space again.
So much to talk about.
Exactly. All right, here we go.
Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? We've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media.
So, Dom, what was the biggest story, let's say, from the past few days that you didn't have to follow, but you were just like, oh my God, what the hell is going on?
Oh, Signal. That story. Oh, I swear that's the one where I know we would have been deep in the weeds on that one, Jenna.
Oh my God, we would have been so deep in the weeds. And yeah, no, first of all, everybody is deep in the weeds, and rightly so. So since I did pay attention, partly, I guess, I don't know, like I still feel incredibly curious, etc. But also, I'm doing some freelance work on the side. So being aware of what was going on was important. So would you like me to do a quick breakdown?
I love it.
Okay. So here's how it goes. So earlier this month, and I really can't emphasize this enough, that all of this has gone down in the past few weeks, and we've only just found out what happened. So earlier this month, there a bunch of people, a bunch of senior level officials in the White House get together and are just like, okay, so we are going to plan an attack against Houthi rebels in Yemen because they have been making noise about perhaps striking Israeli, I believe, ships outside of Gaza, etc. So we're going to attack
Mm.
them because we're allies with Israel. Okay. So they get together, and I want to be very specific here. Not just they get together, but specifically, Mike Waltz, who is the national security advisor, sets up a group chat for all of these different White House officials to talk to each other about planning this mission. And somehow or another, included on this group chat is Jeff. Oh my
Jeffrey
God,
Goldberg.
Jeffrey Goldberg. Okay, sorry. My
Yeah,
brain is
editor in
swimming with
chief.
so many different names.
Editor in
Editor in
chief,
chief
right?
of the Atlantic somehow
Right.
mysteriously just gets added to this whole thing. Now, for the record, Mike Waltz, who again, national security advisor, has never really made crystal clear exactly why he would have even had Jeff Goldberg's number in his phone or whatever, because it kind of gives, are you leaking? Are you what? Why do you even have his number? He just made it just like, I don't know, the number just popped up. That happens sometimes. And people are just like, I mean, no, but fine. So anyway, so Jeff Goldberg gets included into this group chat and he starts getting all these messages about plans about, bombing Yemen and Houthis this and blah, 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 and like, handling the messaging around this and all this stuff. And at first he was just like, this can't be real. Nobody's this stupid. This has got to be a joke. I'm getting punked or something like that. So he doesn't really take it that seriously. And it wasn't until somewhere around mid-March, I want to say like March 15th, when bombs start falling, that he's like, oh my
Mhm.
God, that was real. I was in the group chat. So, being the responsible journalist, the award-winning journalist, the highly respected journalist that Jeff Goldberg is, he actually removes himself from this group chat. How you do that in Signal, I don't know. But I also want to say that Signal is not like a government entity or something like that. It's just it's a public app that anybody can download on their phone. Like, could have been WhatsApp, which I kind of feel like maybe Mark Zuckerberg's just like, I could have used that free press. Anyway. Okay, so then the Atlantic decides to publish a story saying, um, so our editor was on this highly sensitive group chat, and national cabinet members, like high-level security officials, were discussing this military operation. The initial response was deny, deflect, lie, basically, and very, very loudly and aggressively, if so. I mean, what I remember catching offhand was this article, or not this article, excuse me, this interview from, well, actually, several people involved in this, but I feel like I saw an interview with Pete Hegseth, who, of course, we all now know is the what's his title now? He
Defense
is
Secretary.
the defense
Defense Secretary.
secretary. Okay, thank you. All right, because literally there's so many names and like titles to go through. But
I
anyway,
know.
so Pete Hegseth was, I think, in Hawaii or something, and he comes up to the mic and he's very bombastic and he's got his chest out and he's just like, never no security, highly sensitive information, and no tactical planning took place, and this never happened, and that's the end of the story, and like walks away in a huff. Like, very just, how dare you even ask me about this? Even though, again, um, the implication is that actually, yeah, y'all was planning it. So why would the specifics of the plan not be included in all of this? So it's not just Pete Hegseth, it's also Mike Waltz, it's everybody. They're all just like, no, 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 this isn't what you think. This was just, a casual conversation and it's no big deal. There was no security breach, no national security issues leaked. This story came out what, like Monday? No, maybe
Yeah,
Tuesday?
right.
Okay,
I thought it came out. Well, it came out earlier in the week. Yeah.
earlier in the week. So they all deny the next day. The day after that, The Atlantic releases its second article where actually Jeff was like, no, I got the receipts. Here's the details that they were sharing. And it's like specifics about when bombs drop, how many bombs drop, etc. And so huge, this thing now explodes into an even bigger problem because several things at play. One, um, again, an app is not a secure system to have these kind of conversations on. That's B. A, excuse me. B is that there was also a lot of problematic. It's not just that they were sharing these incredibly sensitive information via this app, but also they were having a lot of other, you would consider maybe dangerous, sensitive conversations. Like, for example, they were smack talking Europe about not being, let's say, not having the money to do something like this, and basically implying that Europe wasn't man enough. Weird stuff. Then there was the childishness of all of the emojis that they were sharing with, like, American flag and the fist and like a flexed arm and fire and all this other stuff. Then there was also the fact that if this journalist was accidentally included in there, and this isn't a secured app that the government has vetted, then
Mhm.
anybody could hack into this. And by that, because this mission wasn't like even some drone thing, these were manned aircrafts. So you theoretically were putting American lives at risk through this. Then there's also the fact that you could have given a heads up to the Houthis. There's also that. Just so many layers of problems. So now here we are. We're taping this on Thursday, and now Thursday the story is the government going to hold any of these people accountable? And the response seems to be no. In fact, right before we started taping, the New York Times dropped a story that says the headline is, quote, Pam Bondi, who is the attorney general, suggests that Signal chat episode is unlikely to be criminally investigated. So no,
I mean, I'm not
stop
going to say
bringing it
this
up.
much about this. What I will say about those chats is, it shows that they're true to character. I mean, everything in their fire emojis, the way that they're speaking, it all to me is definitely, or, just it seems like it's who they are in front of us. Sounds like it's who they are behind the scenes. Probably more of a hot mess, of course, but still, they are a hot mess in front and behind the scenes. So they are who they are. And I think that's the thing that I'm like, okay, y'all are just
But
like,
at the same time, I mean, you and I have had this conversation before several times when we talk about politics, is that at the end of the day, the majority of the voting population of the people who chose to vote, because the
mhm,
majority of the voting population didn't even bother to show up, but of the people who
mhm,
chose to vote, the majority put these
shows
people
this.
in power.
It
Yeah.
shows this.
This is what they chose. So that makes it the thing that I also found really interesting was on the flip side as the Democrats who are somehow still flailing at this point.
Hmm.
Now we've got people out here dropping F-bombs to signify their disgust. Apparently Senator Duckworth said what did she say? I think she called Pete Hegseth a effing liar. We also have
They are, yeah.
Mayor Pete, of all people, who's like the most buttoned up, polite guy in the world, said that this was a major
Yeah.
fuck up. Like, it just, okay. And I just can't believe this is where we are. We haven't even
I
reached 100 days, FYI.
it's this makes, yeah, this makes 2016, this is 2016 on steroids. This is what
It
this feels
is.
like right now. 2024 is 2016 on steroids.
Well,
So
technically
the fast pace.
2017, I think.
Oh, but
Well, only
yes,
because
but
the
you don't even,
election year was the year before, and
yes,
then, yeah, so it would have
you're
been
right.
2017. But
But it makes
yes,
his first term seems like this is triple that. It's just moving. Even, and I remember back then we had not really seen the news. And when I say the news, I mean like it didn't move as fast. It definitely moved. Listen, it was moving fast even before then. You have, of course, social media was making the world faster, but there was something about the administration which was all about doing things at a much faster pace, throwing a lot of, different things out there to kind of just, in my opinion, keep everybody guessing of what was going to happen next because you really didn't know. It's the same, and right now it's the same thing that's happening. It's
I
chaos.
mean, yeah, well, no, I mean that flood the zone is definitely working.
Flood the zone.
And that wasn't the only thing that happened because, of course, there was a hearing
Oh,
on Capitol Hill.
oh, yes, yes. Now that I was fascinated by because
That one I actually didn't
it
pay close attention to.
But well, with this one, what happened was it had to deal with NPR and PBS going on Capitol Hill. So NPR and PBS went to Washington this week. Um,
That feels
and
like a
it was,
joke.
I know,
NPR and
I know.
PBS walk into
Go
Washington.
there we go. So the leaders of NPR and PBS went to Capitol Hill to face questions by House Republicans about whether public broadcasting should still be getting federal funding. It was led by the hearing was led by Doge subcommittee, chaired by that favorite of ours, Congressperson Marjorie Taylor Greene, uh, and basically the Republicans were accusing NPR and PBS of leaning left and failing to reflect broader range of views in their news reporting. Um, so NPR's Catherine Marr was there. PBS's Paul Kerger was there. They were saying that public media plays this crucial role, especially in rural areas where local news is disappearing. They also defended their editorial standards.
1000%.
They also defended their editorial standards and commitment to balance reporting. Because, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, well, we've worked in that world. And I mean, in the work that we did, we always represented both sides. I mean, people can sometimes, here's the deal. People will sometimes accuse you of being one-sided because they don't agree with what you just put on the air. That is not it's like that's not the reporters there to give you the story. If you don't like the story or if you don't like the tone of the story, that is your problem. You know what I mean? Like we all
Also,
are
if
here
you
to
don't like the
listen.
subject of the story, because one of the things that I've always loved about being involved with public media is that we told stories from marginalized perspectives. And if you
Yeah.
just don't even want to hear from those people, then you could easily just be like, well, that's bias. No, it's not.
Yeah, and we've featured, I mean, we featured in terms of politics too. We featured people from both sides of the aisle. Whether or not we agreed with that, we were always respectful. I can say, like, I know people said that oftentimes about how they appreciated, even if they didn't agree with what we had to say, that they appreciated we were respectful with them. So that's to me, like, that's where I sort of get really frustrated because I think nowadays, you have a lot of people who you just don't want to, if, like you just said, if they don't like the subject, or if you, what they perceive as you attacking them because you're telling the side of the story where they feel like they're, but if they are the facts, then, I mean, if you don't like it, then I guess that's up to you. But again, looking at what public media does in terms of rural areas and areas that do not get, who might not have access to these stories, it's a big deal. And
It's a huge
there was
deal.
an interesting part of the conversation. Now, this one did make, it did make social media, and it was interesting. But I do find we've talked about this before. So there was a point where during the questioning, uh, Congressperson James Comer um, was talking to NPR's Catherine Marr, and the moment was, it came down to this misunderstanding of the phrase editorial standards. So let's take a listen to that.
One of the first things that I did in coming in May was to beef up our editorial standards. I directed my editor-in-chief, who, by the way,
Why is NPR even doing editorials?
I'm so
should
I'm so
NPR
sorry.
even do editorials?
I don't mean editorial in terms of opinion editorial.
Do you even need opinion? What does it matter with the opinion? If you're a federally funded entity that's supposed to provide the news, can you not provide the news?
Of course.
Fair and balanced?
Of course, Congressman. I mean, editorial standards for our journalism was to beef up our editorial practices, bringing in more editors to make sure that we have more points of view reflected in every story. I've engaged in a number of actions trying to address
and my
some of
time's
these
expired.
concerns.
I've lost confidence in public radio. I don't think, Madam Chair, they should get a penny of federal funds. I yield back.
So it was just interesting because I feel like this is something you and I have been talking about for so long about, literacy, news literacy, and people understanding what it means when you say editorial versus editorial standards. They are two different things. And seeing here's a congressperson who also, here's somebody who's out
So
there who's,
editorial commentary versus editorial standards. That
well,
seemed to be what
well,
tripped him up.
well, no, but editorials are just that. Like they are commentary, and so there are, and
Editorial commentary, but
yeah.
editorial standards, which is
Oh
what
yes.
Pam
Oh
was
yeah.
talking about, was something
Yeah.
else.
No, it's like, no, Catherine. Yeah, it's like,
Oh,
yes,
Catherine,
it's,
sorry.
yeah, no, and I think that to me is like she was saying, like our editorial standards of how we cover stories, and I just think that it just hits home this fact of how much people really don't understand, or don't have that news literacy. And that goes for going out there and watching news stories and reading news stories, watching a story on whether it's on, social media or on broadcast television. People are confusing these different, opinion and what is real news and what does it mean when you're saying when somebody's reporting on hard news and giving you facts and saying, well, I don't believe what they're trying, what they're saying because you disagree with them. Again, it goes back to the whole thing of needing to have more of this news literacy. But here's my question for you, Jenna. Like after, this hearing, do you really think, I mean, to me, it feels like we already kind of know what they went into this with. I mean, this is part of Doge. That's a subcommittee that was, so they're going in there. It's like, does anybody really think they're not going to recommend defunding public media?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was also my takeaway from that exchange was, I don't know, an attempt perhaps to give reason to something that was going to happen anyway. Like, it was very clear that even when she was just like, well, actually, no, I'm talking about editorial standards with people who edit news stories, and we try to get, as she said, a multitude of perspectives to make sure. He was like, yeah, well, I don't like it anyway, so we're going to defund it. Which is, so my takeaway from that was just like, you're doing this anyway. The whole thing is a
It's funny.
farce.
It's funny because it reminds me of, okay, now this is where I bring my housewives into it, but it's very classic housewives, because what you do is when there's a finale or there's a moment and whether it's the reunion or the finale, there hasn't been enough drama, you got to make drama out of something and you just grab onto whatever you can, and it doesn't matter what it is, because the whole point is that you had something to say. They had it didn't matter if he misunderstood the quote or he misunderstood what she was saying. It doesn't matter. Like you just said, he had to create a moment to basically say, it doesn't matter. I say defund them, which is what he recommended. Is, I think we should defund them. It didn't. The fact, this was all just show, and they just wanted to fund public television, which is a real shame. I know that here's a deal. I know people say, well, if you look at it, we've discussed this too, where it's like a big chunk of their funds do not come from, it's like
Oh,
they're
we used to
very
say that all
small
the
in terms.
time in pledge drives. That like
It's
it's
that
only a portion. Most of the
portion, very
funding
small.
is public. That's why the pledge drives can be so, I feel so heavy-handed sometimes, and people are just like, oh my God. But no, real talk. Most
But
of the money is,
but
that's
that
where it's coming from.
but that money does impact smaller stations,
Big time.
bigger stations like New York, Los Angeles, like the bigger stations. I'm not saying that that doesn't hurt them, but they have good resources. These smaller stations need that money.
Endowments and big donors, and
Yes,
yeah.
these are big, but so the more rural, the smaller states, they're the ones who will suffer. The areas that are already being hit hard by not having local media in there, having like that loss of local media. Now you're taking away something else. I mean, again, that's where, and it starts to make you wonder if that's being done on purpose. Like, is there, you know what I mean? Like if wanting to kind of remove more media. That's what we were seeing happen
I
with
don't think that's
this.
conspiratorial because, again, if you look at
I
an
know.
electoral map,
Just
the
yes,
areas that
yes.
were won by the current president and the areas that also are news deserts, it's almost an exact match.
And you see the attack happening on media. We've seen it with the AP, which is still going on, and we see it with a lot of we see these stories still going on in terms of how the media is spoken about. I mean, there's obviously, a desire to control the media to, really basically not be critical. Just like we're seeing even what we talked about with Signal. You know what I mean? It's like, stop. There's no story here. Leave it alone, people. There's no story here. So same thing with this. Like if you are able to really control the media or to minimize places that might offer fair um, journalism that maybe you don't like sometimes, then that helps one side. So
Well, that is
um,
another reason why there is more and more Americans, especially I would guess in those news deserts, are turning to social media to try to get their information. And that is why there is now a push or a concern within social media circles to find a somewhat independent or as much as possible social media platform. Right now, pretty much all the platforms that we use, save for, I don't know if everybody decides to go back to Red Note out of spite, but save for that, all of those apps all have a CEO who
mhm.
showed up to the inauguration and,
and
made a huge, sizable donation to the presidential library, etc.
and also, you know, even the ones that, if even if they haven't, I think apps are all about keeping people on their platforms. So it isn't necessarily about looking out for the public. It's like being able to get information. I think what I appreciated about public media and what we did, where we work together and other places too in public media, is this ability to be like, what's so important is telling the story, even if just telling other people's stories that are underrepresented, telling the stories of people that you might not agree with, telling the stories of people you do agree with. And it almost was like we had an ability to just tell a story and it almost got other people to listen sometimes and to make their own judgment calls versus feeling like you had to adhere, like you were trying to appease,
Well, you were
it's
also, I think,
advertisers.
learning through stories, which is those are the stories that I loved the most, where,
Yeah.
I would get feedback from the audience that was basically just, I had no idea. Those were the stories I
And
really loved telling the most.
And I just think, like, with that, when you don't have the advertisers who are there, when you're not looking at just the numbers, the ratings, or whatever is going on out there, it was a way to kind of feel like you could tell the story and not have to worry about that. And now, obviously the world's changed and being on social media, you do want to make sure your story is being heard because you could do great reporting, and we've talked about this too, and nobody
Hmm.
hears about it. That's not good either. So I think public radio and public television do have their work cut out in terms of how they are able to make sure people do hear their stories and being much more independent on their own. And unfortunately, it certainly looks, I'm not going to be surprised that that they both get defended because I just feel like that's the direction we're heading in. So,
Well,
and
that
it's
means
been
more
that
of
way
our
for ages.
colleagues on the unemployment line.
Yeah. And less stories and less
Yeah.
communities are being fully informed and hearing about what's happening in their towns, in their cities, um, in their communities. And that goes for not just for like one political party. It goes for all political parties. It goes for every story out there. So we'll see what happens, I guess, once they actually do. But I don't know. Not optimistic for sure.
Unfortunately, I mean, yeah, this is a trying time, I think, for everybody. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about not having to. I mean, again, like I said, I was certainly curious about the Signal story, especially since it's become just a huge literally international uh blunder, let's
Mhm.
say. But then at the same time, I also wonder about what are some of the other big local stories, national stories that aren't getting the attention because we're also hyper focused on this, like, you gotta be kidding me, this happened story. And then I also remind myself, we haven't reached 100 days yet.
No, no. I
So the
think the only
soonest the public can really do anything, if they really don't like this, is the midterms. And that's like
oh,
500 plus days away. I
and
don't know
this
if
is
people are going to
not
remember.
going to be no. No, and my only concern when these stories happen sometimes is because of the fact that they can be juicy in a sense, especially for those who are watching it, and because it does play out like a soap opera in a way, and it has twists and turns, and oh, you're lying, we don't have this, and boom, all of a sudden here are the receipts. So I get it, but I go back to we do lose sight sometimes. Like it's important. People in politics, yes, they do have a reason for keeping this in the light, especially when you're talking about whether it's Democrats out there fighting, and trying to make sure this story gets heard. But I do get worried that there's a lot of other things going on that we're not paying attention to. So
Or
we'll see
maybe
what
not fully
happens.
understanding, because
Yeah.
with pieces that we're putting together, we are gathering all the ingredients. Some of them are the ways that things that might seem innocuous, like popular culture, are actually really, really important to the way that we engage with news, digest the news, and the way that we engage with and discuss culture in general.
Yeah. It's,
As one example. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other
yeah.
stuff that we're just like looking deeply into.
Well, there are lots of things that we've discussed too, just by having our conversations. Sometimes when we're working on stuff and we're like, oh my goodness, this is like we're talking about these other stories that are just kind of like that have a big impact on us and have a big impact on, how culture evolves too and how we speak to one another. But um I'm looking forward to seeing what happens through the next few days over both of, well, definitely we'll see what happens with the Signal story too. But what
Well,
does have me hopeful,
what?
I will say as much, that we'll be back next week, Jenna.
Yes, we will. With an interview, we're going to have a professional on who's going to be breaking down another aspect of journalism for the audience. And so that's going to be really good because you don't have to just listen to us blather about like, I don't know, man, stuff is weird.
Yes. All right, Jenna.
All right. Well,
Well, it
thanks
was
for
great
joining
chatting
us
with you.
again. Yes, always. And we'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidoffandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.